Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Indivisible Illinois Community Collaborative meeting hosted by the Social Justice Alliance. We are being recorded, just to let you know. I want to wish everyone a happy Black History Month and happy Lunar New Year to all of you. Tonight's topic, of course, is Evanston reparations. I'm Rose Colasino, co-state coordinator of Indivisible Illinois. I am also the co-lead and founder of the Social Justice Alliance team, this group. We welcome Justin of the Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston and Kelly of Indivisible Illinois 9 Anti-Racist Group and Indivisible REI Illinois. Before I turn it over to the co-leads of this organization, IISJA, Kim and Jonathan, I want to tell you more about the Social Justice Alliance. SJA was launched 2 years ago during the pandemic in 2020. With COVID-19 becoming more and more apparent, we wanted to make sure that voters had safe, secure, and fair access to their vote. It also became quite clear that most at risk, unfortunately, were voters of color, that they might have difficulty getting to the polls with limited locations and staff. We decided to focus on vote by mail, actually, as an opportunity for voters who wanted to vote safely at home. We also discovered that underserved communities would face more risk than other voters. We reached out to various community leaders. These aren't all of them, but some of our partners that we're very proud to mention: Communities Partnering for Peace, Action Now, Black Millennial Renaissance, Illinois Muslim Coalition, and the Hispanic Institute, among others, to reach out to voters and make sure that all voices were heard. If I could, some of our accomplishments included the following. Our website, called Virus Free Voting Illinois, developed by our own Jonathan, whom you are going to hear from shortly, made it much easier for people to vote. Also, successful Twitter storms that Kim and Justin were predominant on. We got the word out to many voters with about 60 million impressions. We had the opportunity to distribute over 8,000 voter registration and vote by mail placards in both English and Spanish to increase turnouts. We also organized regular phone banks, contacting over 5,000 voters in underserved communities to get out the vote, pursuing equity and justice. Jonathan and Kim will tell you more about our goals and objectives from last year to now. We continue to outreach to partners with budding relationships with organizations we're proud to mention: Chicago 400, Aunt Mount Foundation, and the Indigenous Peoples Day Coalition. We were able to partner with Chicago 400 and APDC to collaborate with them on social media events. Jonathan and Kim will also tell you more about our other current projects, including our roadmap to 2022, school board disinformation sessions, for which we provided an early platform, and our voter registration meetings, expanding the vote in Illinois, Wisconsin, and swing states. I also want to give a very grateful shout out to Bill Davis, co-lead of NWSOFA, and his promotional machine, tireless promotional machine, I should say, that has drawn in our broad and engaged audience and advocates on a regular basis on a Saturday at noon, which isn't all that easy. With that, I turn it over to my colleagues, Jonathan and Kim.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rose. So thank you again for joining the Indivisible Illinois Social Justice Alliance, Evanston Reparations. Join the Social Justice Alliance every Saturday at noon on Zoom. Indivisible Illinois Social Justice Alliance, we are a team of 3. Rose Colasino is the founder of this group, and she's also our advisor. Jonathan and myself, Kim Garnett, are co-founders of this group. I'm sorry, co-leads of this group. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Jonathan Rogoff, my co-lead, to talk about our organizing sentence.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Rose, for setting that preface. The Social Justice Alliance is a multiracial, ethnic, and generational coalition pursuing a more diverse, engaged, and inclusive electorate by educating voters and advocating policies that directly impact underserved communities through empowering, supporting, and elevating frontline groups to achieve economic, political, and social justice.
You can contact us at IISJA@indivisible.il.com. We are on Facebook, so if you're not following us, please do so. I will drop our social media links in the chat. Follow us on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. If you're not following us, follow us on Twitter as well. And at this time, I will turn it over to Jonathan again to talk about our monthly meeting structure.
Thank you again. Yes, so we have developed a cadence that so we can kind of cover different topics at a regular interval, pretty much monthly interval. Week one, we focus specifically on underserved community partners and things that impact the underserved communities directly, again, toward that goal of elevating those partners and what they're doing and promoting where they're at and making sure we're in alignment with where they are. Week two, we look at the bigger picture and we look at where things are at with in what we're calling this year the Suppression-Free Democracy Roadmap to 2022. And so that gives us kind of an idea of where we're at, where we're going, what's going on with at the national perspective, how we tie that to a local perspective, and what are actions we can engage in right now to push forward to winning and succeeding in 2022 and 2024. Week three, we do a messaging discussion, which of late, because it's the hot button topic, is about what's going on in our school boards and has to do with critical race theory, has to do with a lot of the other stuff that we're seeing in, at the school board level. Week four, we are focusing on voter registration because that's one of our key areas. We have to turn out the vote in 2022, and it's going to be a lift in 2022. But if we turn out the voters that we added for the blue wave in 2018 and the voters we added to bring Biden on, to make sure Biden beat Trump in 2020, that is all very, very doable. So that's our cadence. And so please join us on Saturdays at noon, and you kind of know what you're going to get which week. Thank you very much.
Will you apply for the reparations?
I will, yeah.
And why?
Because it's old.
This is my home. It's where I live. I love it. My people are here. This community was redlined historically, and that has come along with damages that continue today. Resources were stripped away from the Black community, and that stripped away a sense of place and wealth as well.
We've been doing the work, and the work that we've done has not produced any relief in the racial disparities that we have. And it was appropriate that we do something radically different to make good on the commitment that we've made to the Black community. And reparations was the next thing for us to do.
I am 98 years old.
We moved to Evanston in 1959.
The contractor, he said, so it's completely out. He said, you find a lot anywhere in Evanston, and I'll build whatever you want. Well, when he said that, he meant in the Black neighborhoods. It was just the way it was. And as we speak, in 2021, we still have these same types of problems.
My hope is that families that are currently living here right now today that are burdened get some relief and build some wealth through our reparation program.
It's certainly a starter, but you look at housing prices today, is that a down payment?
It's a drop in the bucket. You have denied me all my 98 years. Hopefully, before I die, I'll see the world change.
And get some reparations.
And get some reparations, right.
So for you, this notion of reparations in Evanston isn't meant to be a drop in the bucket, but the beginning of a stream that becomes a river, that becomes an ocean.
When I introduced reparations in Evanston, it was always the first step of many to come. There is a lifetime of work ahead of me and my children for us to get to justice for the Black community. And I can't wait to celebrate the family that receives their first reparation benefit. I cannot wait for that day.
Okay, are we ready to go? I hope everyone is able to hear me clearly. Good evening, everyone. Happy February. Happy Black History Month to you all, or as my friend Kelly would say, every month is Black History Month. Couldn't agree with her more. It is so good, so good to be here in this space with my Indivisible family. For those who don't know me, my name is Justin Markovich Garnett. I am an artist and organizer, and I join you tonight representing many different entities. First and foremost, NWSOFA Indivisible, an Indivisible Illinois Social Justice Alliance, working as a communications lead. I have been fortunate enough to be working with Indivisible for a few years now. I started my journey beginning during the launch of the virus-free voting initiative that Rose was mentioning at the beginning of this call. And I was able to work closely with her and so many of my friends on this call in that initiative, which proved to be wildly successful, as Rose mentioned, those statistics. And we like to think that we made a real difference in the 2020 election. I've also been an advocate for women's rights, as well as gun violence prevention, organizing for causes which are near and dear to my heart. I created and hosted Conversation Z, which I always mention as being really one of the most transformative works that I've produced. This podcast was focused on teen and young adult activists sharing their stories and their work. It shed a light on how the baton is being passed down to the generations who are leading in their fields. So since that time, I have been certified by the National Democratic Training Committee for Political Communications, which led me into working directly with the city of Evanston and their reparations work. I was born in Evanston, and my family has been in Evanston for well over 100 years. I now sit on the board of directors for the Reparations Stakeholders Authority of Evanston, a Black-led nonprofit organization, which I will absolutely be getting into as we dive into tonight's discussion. And I always like to open these chats with transparency that I am not, nor do I claim to be a reparations expert, but I am lucky enough to be under the guidance and the education of remarkable leaders in the field who are even working on this work in a national setting. So I look forward to sharing that knowledge with you as I hope we all learn and grow together this evening. So I am going to pass it over to Kelly B, and we will get into it.
Let's see, unmute myself. That's always good. Hi, I'm Kelly B, and I am a member of Indivisible IL9. I am a co-founder of our anti-racist work group with that organization. Anyone is welcome to join us. We meet every Sunday at 10 a.m. via Zoom, and we work on our own anti-racism inside of ourselves so that we can make sure to that our work also has anti-racism baked into it. I am also a co-founder of the fledgling Indivisible REI Illinois group, and I'll put a pitch in right now for next week's meeting at this same bat channel, same bat time. We will be leading the meeting next week, and we hope you'll all join us. And now I'm going to give it back to Justin. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. It's really good to be doing this with you. So I just want to briefly go over what we're going to cover, because we're talking about reparations tonight, and that is a very broad word, I think, for a lot of us. There's a lot of opinions on just what that looks like, what that is. So first and foremost, I want to talk about the history. So how did we get here? I think that you hear a lot when you're talking about especially critical race theory. There is a sense of, there's a lack of understanding of history, and to address where we're at and how to make a difference, how to address particular issues, you have to understand the history behind it. Where did we come from? So we're going to definitely go over that. The second thing that we're going to go over is the attempts. So what have we done? What has been done historically? What has been attempted? Then I want to get into the progress, and that is going to be our present day. So what are we doing right now to address the history and the things that have worked and the things that have not worked? And then we will land on the topic, which I like to call the goal. So where are we headed? So that will give, a rundown of just how we're going to structure tonight's talk. I do want to mention that there is a Q&A option in this webinar where you're able to relay questions. I understand that because this is not a typical Zoom meeting, and we're fortunate to have so many participants, that we're not going to really be able to get to everything and to everyone, but I really encourage you to engage with us. I want to hear from you. I want to be able to answer some of those questions. So please utilize that tool. We'll have moderators on the call who are going to be able to field those questions. So one thing I would have loved to have asked, but I know that I can't technically do it, is when you think of reparations, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? And I just want you to think about that for a moment. And I'm sure that there's going to be a few of you who will say 40 acres and a mule. That is the phrase that we hear so often. And I will never forget when I was watching during the debates, the Democratic debates during the 2020 election. I'll never forget Marianne Williamson bring up 40 acres and a mule. And the crowd went wild because it has been one of the most controversial subjects in politics for the past 157 years. So let's dig into 40 acres and a mule. Where did that come from? So this phrase is first mentioned on January 16th, 1865. This came in Special Order 15, which was given by General William T. Sherman, and this is after the Civil War. So General William T. Sherman and the Secretary of War met with 20 Black community leaders. And what was discovered during that meeting was that what freed Black folks felt was most important, that they needed, was land. Okay, so land is key for both parties for so many reasons. Land provides us a sense of ownership. It gives people a sense of placement in a community, a sense of prosperity, a sense of hope. So that is really was what the newly freed, enslaved people felt they needed to be able to get a head start and to build a life for themselves. And also the US government saw land as a way to provide for the millions of newly freed Black people who either followed the Union into the war or were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. So you have Special Order 15, and this was divided into 7 parts, and with 3 key takeaways that I want to discuss tonight. So the first one was in Section 1, they list that the Atlantic coastlines of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida were to be set aside for freed Black people to make lives for themselves. So you had that written out in this special order. Then in Section 2, settlements were to be governed and run by Black settlers. So I want to touch on this briefly because when I even speaking it, I'm like, I think there are some people out there who still think that once the Emancipation Proclamation was brought to light, that things were integrated. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Things were very much so segregated. And the idea was to set land aside for the free enslaved, and to have them govern their own land, their own space, create their own community that was completely separate from the rest of the country. And then in Section 3, you had allocated plots of up to 40 acres out of the 40,000 acres seized that would be set aside and awarded to the formerly enslaved. So the general, he also ordered that the army could lend a mule to the new settlers, hence the second part of that famous phrase. So I hope that gives some context into how 40 acres and a mule became this the promise that we remember. There was a lot more to that special order. It was, like any legislation, it was a very in-depth piece of a law, but that is what we still hold on to even to this day, 157 years later. So now I want to talk about how Special Order 15 was approved and it was signed by President Abraham Lincoln, which we all know President Abraham Lincoln also was the president who signed the Emancipation Proclamation. For any history buffs in this room, you know what happened to President Lincoln right after he made these progressive moves in office. He was assassinated. So shortly after he's assassinated, President Andrew Johnson takes office. And President Johnson is arguably, to me, one of the most racist presidents that this country has seen. And he immediately overturned Special Order 15. He was a South empathizer and reclaimed said land back to the plantation owners. And what this did was this gave many Black residents in the South no option, truly, but to remain under the control of their previous slave owners. And to this day, 40 acres and a mule continues to be a rallying cry for the forgotten promises of the Reconstruction era and the hope for justice for the descendants of the enslaved harmed by the system. So that is, in a nutshell, the history of reparations and its first promise by the US government. So we move into the 20th century. So this is, for most of us, the period of time that we were born into. And as we move into the 20th century, we began to witness more discriminatory harm done by the US government to communities, including additional oppressed groups outside of the Black community. And even though a lot of these harms were done after the act of slavery, this is when we began to actually see reparations be addressed by the US government to make amends for harm done. So I'd love to just touch on other reparations that we have seen. So we have the Japanese reparations. So during World War II, the US government set up internment camps, concentration camps, and the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, it was spearheaded by leaders like Congressman Norman Mineta, who himself was a survivor of Japanese internment. And the bill was followed by a formal ceremony for the survivors in 1990, issued checks of $20,000 to 80,000 internees and their families, along with a letter of apology. So that was the reparations that we saw for the Japanese and the Japanese Americans that were harmed by the US government during World War II. So I want to touch on that again, the steps, and I want you to remember this so that when we get into the discussion about reparations in Evanston, it gives us some context as to just how things can be done and how they have been done. So you had a formal ceremony for the survivors. You had cash payments of $20,000 to 80,000 people, and you had official letter of apology to those victims, survivors, and their families. So then we also are looking at one of the most grotesque harms this country has faced, which is the indigenous people and the reparations that has happened there. So you had the Indians Claim Commission that began in 1946 by President Truman to address the harms done to the indigenous community. So from 1946 to 1978, $1.3 billion were contributed to 176 tribes and nations, which when you break that number down, ended up being around $1,000 per person, okay? Chronic mismanagement of this program, of this commission, I should say, was called out in 1971 by a reporter. And what this shed a light on was that $962 million worth of Alaskan land, so we're talking 44 million acres of land, was awarded to indigenous people in exchange for them giving up future claims to land in that state. So another way that you see this happen is no funds were given directly to these eligible residents. Instead, regional corporations were in charge of the land, and beneficiaries were given shares of stake within those organizations. So this is a classic example of reparations, but being completely controlled by the entities which inflicted the harm. I also want to touch on international reparations because we are not the only country who has dealt with systemic harm and how it's been addressed. So you have two topics I want to talk about is Germany and South Africa. Germany, I think, is a great example of how reparations can be done and how healing can begin. So 1952, post-World War II, Germany develops a reparation program, which allotted $89 billion towards Israel and the survivors of the Holocaust over the decades. So Germany, they did focus on funds. That was cash payments. That was a big focus for them. But they also included school curriculums that addressed the evils of the Holocaust and developed many national markers and museums in honor of those victims and survivors. So for anyone on this call who has been to Germany, you may have noticed that the Holocaust and the harms of it is not something that they hide from their people or the society, and have really attempted, and it's never enough, and we're going to get into that absolutely, but have attempted to address that history. So then you also have South Africa. So reparations in South Africa took a different approach, and they primarily focused on truth telling. And so the TRC, so the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was developed by the nation's first Black president, President Nelson Mandela, in 1995. The committee held nationally televised public hearings where Black South Africans could voice their experiences and share their stories of hardship to spread truth on the realities and the outcomes of apartheid. The TRC existed from 1995 to 2003, and during that time heard 21,000 survivor stories, held over 2,000 public hearings, and issued more than 7,000 amnesty applications. So that should give context on reparations look different depending on the community, how they've been harmed, what the history is, and it can take many different forms. So you have cash payments, you have truth telling. There's many ways to handle reparations depending on what the needs are of that place. So now that we've discussed how reparations have been addressed in other nations and within our communities within the United States, let's discuss what efforts towards reparations in the Black community have been tackled right here in the United States. So obviously, when we discuss reparations, and I know that I'm covering a lot, I hope I'm not losing any of you, but I do feel it's important for us to tackle into that history and to have this knowledge so that when we go into these chats and we talk about what we're doing today, we can understand how things have been done. But there's many different levels to harm. So you have housing discrimination, also known as redlining, which we'll talk about. You have healthcare discrimination. You have educational discrimination. There's many different ways that racism has taken place here in this country and in the world. So in 1932 to 1972, the US held a study called the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. For any of you who know what this was where the US government had over 400 poor Black men, and they were told that they were being treated for syphilis, but instead they were actually given placebo medication and vitamins. So what happened was that unknowingly, these participants became increasingly more ill and transferred the disease to their partners as well as their children. This is a prime example of how many health disparities have harmed the Black community during the 20th century to today. A reporter broke the story in the media in 1972. The study quickly shut down, and the survivors and their families received an out-of-court settlement for $10 million. The US government also promised further health care to the men affected by the study, and then later on offered health care to family members that were also impacted. And then in 1997, President Clinton offered a public apology for the government's role in the cruel experiment. So that was a form of reparations that was given for a very specific harm. And then we also have reparations that have happened in the city of Chicago. So the city of Chicago, and I would love to know if anyone remembers this or has any knowledge on this, but we also paid reparations to the victims of former police commander John Burge, who from the 1970s to the 1990s formed a secret task force of officers who forced Black men through torture and manipulation to confess to crimes that they did not commit. So over 125 men were tortured by Burge and his affiliates. And in 2015, the city approved reparations for those impacted by his crimes. So the $5.5 million settlement included the following: money paid to the survivors and their families, waived tuition to city colleges in Chicago, mandatory CPS curriculums about Burge's crimes, and a public memorial, which actually has yet to happen. So that is another form of reparations that we've seen that have been tackled. So we're looking at all these different reparations that have been done. So now let's talk about on the federal level, how we're trying to, as a nation, address this. So in 1989, Congressman John Conyers Jr. introduced his resolution titled H.R. 40 to his colleagues on the Congress floor. The 40, representing 40 acres, long promised to his people. It was the first major and first formal step made for slavery reparations in the United States. So I think what's really important to know about HR 40, because I think a lot of us have organized towards HR 40. You've heard HR 40 be discussed. The bill calls for the formation of the National Reparations Commission to develop reparations proposals. So this commission that this bill would authorize would be made up of 13 people. And I think something that's really important to note about HR 40 is that it includes no specific amount for reparations to be paid or list any details of how reparations should be paid. It's strictly a motion to move the conversations and the efforts forward. So when it sounds like something that has been really hard for Congress. I mean, the bill has been presented on the Congress floor every year since 1989. And when Representative Conyers retired in 2017, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee assumed the role of the first sponsor for the bill and has spearheaded the mission that Representative Conyers first envisioned. And to this day, it has not made it to the stage to even receive a vote, though the bill is actually the largest in number of co-sponsors. If you look at HR 40, it is, I mean, almost all of Democratic Congress that is in support of the proposal. So, you know, I think for a lot of people, especially on the Republican end of the spectrum, they think that, oh, we can't tackle HR 40, we can't because reparations, like it's strictly, the bill is strictly just trying to put it forward for it to be studied, for it to be discussed, for us to dive into what that looks like, for us to compile a formal commission of people, of experts to come up with what that looks like and what that is. So the national movement for reparations, it continues to grow. And now states and cities are looking towards their own reparations and how this can be done locally. So before I get into Evanston and the local push, I just want to remind everyone that HR 40 has been trying to push itself forward, and Congress has been trying to push it forward since the late 80s. And it is really on all of us to encourage our electeds and to push our electeds and to put our feet on the necks of our electeds to get this moving forward so that we can start that discussion on a federal level. Because as Kelly and I are going to talk about as we get into the steps and the things being done in Evanston, I think it's really important that we don't forget that until this is addressed on a federal level, that we have not completely done the work. So, like I said, reparations can be done hyper locally. So that includes Robin Ruth Simmons of Evanston, who I'm very excited to, she wasn't able to be on this call, but I'm excited to share her story. She has been a mentor to me and so many of my colleagues on the Stakeholders Authority. She has become the face of reparations for the nation. Anything that you look up currently about reparations, you're going to see her face. You're going to see Sheila Jackson Lee. You're going to see Dr. Reverend Michael Neighbors. You're going to see a lot of these people that I've been fortunate enough to work with. So just to share a little bit about Robin. Robin was born and raised in Evanston's 5th Ward in the 1970s. She has a deep-rooted history in the city. Her grandparents moved to Evanston during the Great Migration and have been there ever since. Growing up, she never left the comfort of her 5th Ward neighborhood. Very few Black Evanstonians did. The 5th Ward at this time was almost 100% Black. And when she began public high school in Evanston, her bus rides is actually what began to give her insight into what the rest of the city was like. Smoother roads, bigger homes, exquisite landscapes, and predominantly white. She knew from a very, very young age that these things were separated by race. And as an adult, when Robin was looking to purchase a home for her and her children, in the neighborhood she grew up in, she realized that her hometown was gentrifying and that housing was nearly impossible and expensive to afford. So if it wasn't for a childhood friend that owned a home that they were selling, Robin may not have been able to even live in the neighborhood that molded her, that protected her, and had pushed her to become who she is. So her realizations drew her to learn more about how Evanston has implemented policies over the decades. And she was able to engage with the history, and that gave context to all the things she had witnessed during her lifetime. So there's a archive led by a man named Dino Robinson, who is actually the acting president of the Reparations Stakeholders Authority. A truly, truly wonderful man with so much knowledge of the history of Black Evanston, and he runs the Shorefront Legacy Center, which is an archive. And that is where she was able to really dig and to learn about the laws that were put in place and all of these policies that, like I said, gave her context to just what she was seeing, what she was viewing, and the changes that she was noticing. So what did she do with that? In 2017, Robin decided to run for city council, representing her neighborhood, the 5th Ward. And after being sworn into office, she spends most of her time discovering ways to improve conditions in the 5th Ward. And this is when she starts thinking of this federal effort for reparations. So I think that we have a video that we're going to show about HR 40 and just what has been done on a federal level. And then we can get into how we have tackled things, or trying to tackle things hyper locally. So I'll be back with you soon.
How do you calculate 200 years plus of brutality and murder and violence and the destruction of family and the lack of transfer of wealth? How do you calculate that? How do you calculate that for the descendants of enslaved Africans?
Conversations about the damages caused by the enslavement of Black people and the discriminatory and racist policies that came after emancipation are not new. But as the U.S. continues to reckon with racial injustice, there's a renewed push to figure out how reparations can become a reality.
I think we're at a moment when the nation knows it cannot continue any longer without addressing the original sin, not my neighbor, not my fellow Texan, but the United States government that sanctioned this horrific act and continued disparities against the descendants of enslaved Africans, Black Americans, African Americans, from redlining to denial of loans.
This is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She's served as the representative for Texas's 18th district since 1995. Congresswoman Jackson Lee is the main sponsor of a bill which is meant to address reparations on a national scale. It's called HR 40.
What it says is that we will establish this, appointed by the leaders of the House and Senate and the President of the United States, and we will provide a vast opportunity for data collection and witnesses and testimony and going around the nation and finding out, how do you address this question?
Basically, the bill establishes a commission that would create national reparations proposals that focus on which African Americans should be paid and how. The creators of the bill say it's the first of its kind to address slavery directly at a national level.
Some communities are saying, well, we want to pay reparations, so here's a jobs bill. Well, no, that's maybe good public policy, maybe necessary, maybe important, but it's not reparations.
That's Dr. Ron Daniels. He's the president and founder of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and the convener of the National African American Reparations Commission. He's been part of the fight to pass HR 40 for decades.
HR 40 strikes at the heart, the essence of structural institutional racism in these United States of America.
But critics of the bill have often taken issue with the perceived costs and what they say is a complicated process.
Putting aside the injustice of monetary reparations from current taxpayers for the sins of a small subset of Americans from many generations ago, let me finish. The fair distribution of reparations would be nearly impossible once one considers the complexity of the American struggle to abolish slavery.
All right. That video, obviously we had to cut it short a little bit because we do want to maximize our time and to be able to engage with all of you. But feel free to do research and continue to educate yourself on what HR 40 is and how it works. So I'm going to be more in conversation with my friend Kelly as we discuss how things are being done hyperlocally and just what the perception and all of the discourse has been over the past 2 years. But I do want to mention, leaning back into Robin and what she has taken from this, was that she looked at the goals of HR 40. She just, as when she was in office, she broke down all of the things that HR 40 has listed out, and she realized that slavery was not the only egregious act committed against Black people in the US. I mean, you had Jim Crowing, predatory lending, and currently with the racial terror and the police terror, that there is this push for truth telling and that reparations could be addressed, like I said, locally. So in 2019, she introduces R120 to the city of Evanston City Council, which was legislation that would distribute reparations to Evanston's Black community impacted by the discriminatory acts of segregation. This resolution was historically passed in November of 2019, making it the first passed legislation for Black slavery reparations in the United States. The bill was passed 8-1 in the City Council, with the one nay vote actually being a Black City Council woman. So that kind of leads us in, I think, really well to just how this is being viewed by the community as a whole and how it's being viewed by the Black community. I will share briefly my history in Evanston to give you some context as to how I became fortunate enough to be asked to serve on this board. My great-grandparents moved to Evanston in 1913 from Milledgeville, Georgia. They were both college educated Black folks that were moved to Evanston because, Evanston still had Jim Crow, still had racism and segregation, but Evanston wore it with a smile, and there were more opportunities for them up north than there maybe were for them in their homeland of the South. So they moved here with my great-grandfather's brother, who actually was drafted and served in World War I. His name was Thomas Garnett, and he was the first Black man from Evanston to die in action in World War I. And in 1938, Garnett Place was named after him and my family. And that was really the beginning of our history in Evanston. I am a fourth generation Evanstonian. My father and my uncle grew up in Evanston and was raised in Evanston, my grandfather, and so forth. So there's a sense of community in the Fifth Ward that we're going to discuss and kind of where this all began. So let's talk about just how redlining came to exist in Evanston and just what that looked like. So in 1919, Evanston passed zoning laws that restricted Black residents to one known area known as Area D or the Fifth Ward. So these laws enabled banks to not lend to Black folks outside of the Fifth Ward. And it also included real estate brokers and mortgage lenders in an effort to maintain housing segregation in the city. So after these laws were passed, Black-owned houses were even physically moved from their original location to the Fifth Ward. I have conversations with my grandfather, who's 87, and his sister, who are 93, have lived in Evanston their entire life, and they can recall seeing houses being lifted up and moved to other, brought to other parts of the city. That's how adamant Evanston was about segregating their neighborhoods. And, even houses were destroyed, and coming back from World War II, Black veterans were denied public housing, where public housing was specifically designed for veterans. So much like the rest of the country, Evanston had all these systemic ways of segregating and, de-investing in particular areas, and even in their schools, they practice a lot of segregation. So after this bill was passed, people were had mixed feelings. This is reparations we're talking about. I think there's a lot of emotions that come along with something that is so uniquely personal to not only a community, but how it has impacted you and your family directly. The harm done to my family is going to be different than the harm done maybe to Robin's family, or maybe to a family in Alabama or a family in Florida. So reparations is really unique in that sense. So I'm going to let Kelly come on with me and step in. And I think it's a good time to discuss the movement that has been done and just what the perceptions are. And I can discuss a little bit more about the Stakeholders Authority and what we're trying to do. But I do want to pass it over to Kelly so that she's able to lead us into this.
Thank you so much, Justin. Super interesting to hear that history. So as I said, my name is Kelly. I'm a co-founder of an anti-racist work group, and a few weeks ago on Sunday we were talking about reparations in Evanston. So that's literally how I called on this call, because we were just covering this topic. And the reason the topic came up in our group is I had heard the news item that the first residents to receive the reparations in Evanston had been chosen last month. And on that news item, I also heard, but some residents say this is not enough. And so that piqued my interest in the topic and to investigating further. And so I was thinking about, well, who thinks that it's not enough and why? And I'm gonna show you, I think I can screen share here. I think my screen share is going to replace the screen share that we have up right now. Let's see, messy. Yeah. Oh, there it is. And so I found some articles, and I'm going to read some quotes from some of these articles. And Justin, you mentioned Cicely Fleming, and one of these articles is by her, the one that says, "Here's why Evanston, Illinois reparations aren't reparations." Cicely Fleming is a Black woman, a 5th generation Evanstonian, and she was the only council member to vote against the reparations plan. And a whole quote from that article is, "It promises $9.6 million more over the next 10 years, but provides no specifics for what further repair would look like. Black people know all about government's empty promises. Most significant, it does not give those harmed autonomy and self-determination, most often represented by cash payments. Instead, the plan places myriad restrictions on how, when, and where the so-called reparations can be used." This article does go on to applaud this as a first step, and I think we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But I do want to cover these other articles. The one that says, "Opinion, Evanston, Illinois approved reparations, except it isn't reparations." This was a Washington Post article last year by 2 authors of the book From Here to Equality: Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. And in the quote that I noticed in that article, "This is a good step for the city to take, but let's be clear, this is a housing voucher program, not reparations, and calling it that does more harm than good." And yeah, I mean, I don't know if I heard you say, so maybe you want to say something in there about this, or do you want me to just kind of talk a little bit about this other group and then we can
Well,
lump
I
it up?
think let's knock things out as they come.
Okay.
You know, let's talk quickly about the program, what it is, how it works. That will give, I think, our participants and these folks that are with us some context. So the bill that was passed, it is a $10 million program, and the first initiative of this program is a $400,000 housing restorative program. And what this is allotting $25,000 to 16 families that can prove legacy and housing discrimination from the years of 1919, when Evanston first issued those zoning laws that separated the communities, in 1969, when the Fair Housing Act was put into place. So residents that were in Evanston during those times, or their descendants, would be eligible for this first step. And this first step, like I said, $400,000, $25,000 to 16 families. And the way that would be used, it's not cash payments, it's towards housing. So it's either towards a mortgage or towards a down payment or towards what's the word I'm looking for? Repairs. So that is what that looked like. And I think that leads us into when people are saying, well, this is a housing program and we're giving money back to the entities that have done the harm, because the banks, right, are historically the ones who said, we will not, lend to this group of people. So now we're giving $25,000 to a bank to then assist this community. And I think what Cecily Fleming very, very well states is, she's like, look, I'm very much for reparations, but putting the word reparations in this is, I think, what's challenging for folks. But I think what people need to understand is this is only 4% of the program. And the RSAE, the board I sit on, is a Black-led, Black-informed board that the city has decided to work with directly, so that the people in the community like myself can advise. And actually, the goal is to be able to, for our board to distribute those funds instead of the entities that have done the harm.
So I have two follow-up questions on that for you. One, also regarding housing, putting the money back in the hands of banks, awesome observation about how this is problematic. And then also the fact that it requires you to basically be able to be approved for a loan or have access to that kind of housing to benefit from this. And I kind of wonder if that's been discussed, how, it takes money to make money, right? So is this really reparations if someone's already in a position where they're, they've navigated to a point where they are qualified? And I'm wondering if that topic has come up in the meetings.
They sure have. We've really had to take a hard look at how do we decide now in 2021, 2022, what 40 acres and a mule is, because it's obviously a very different society. And I think when we talk, you and I have had conversations about perfectionism and how that can a lot of times hold us from moving forward, because we're waiting for things to be perfect and to feel perfect. And by no means is this $10 million program enough. It's not. And I sit on the board that is trying to help navigate these decisions and how we're spending this money. But at the end of the day, this is a movement. This is a first step towards addressing the harm that's been done. And I think what Evanston has focused on is, where has the harm most been done and how can we address those directly? Because if we were like, hey, we want $10 million to give out cash payments to Black residents, that would it would not be passed, if I'm being frank. So we really, really had to ask, how can we manage, or I should say city council, I wasn't a part of that decision, but how could they manage to help these communities that have been harmed in a way that the government can align themselves with. So I think that there was, of course, a ton of discussion about that.
Well, I appreciate you talking about, we have talked about perfectionism and how that upholds white supremacy. And so obviously, to keep moving forward, if we want to dismantle white supremacy, we have to recognize the ways that white supremacy acts in our world. And I wanted to point out, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, that immediately after the first names were drawn, that in fact there was a change to who would be qualified for the better, because it was members of the board, right, were excluded, or members of your team were excluded, and already that change has been made, which is great. So maybe you could talk about that.
Well, I think we have to look outside of this time gap that we're looking at, because you have people that came to Evanston in the 1970s that would have absolutely experienced the harms of redlining, which when we talk about the Fifth Ward and how these zoning laws were passed, that is what redlining is. So yes, we're constantly changing the format of how we're navigating this. We're trying to make it as accessible and as fair as possible. And I think that as my work of the communications chairperson for the board is, I am really trying to connect with those that aren't feeling comfortable about this and having these conversations, because those opinions are valid. Any Black person that has an opinion on reparations is valid, and we need to make sure that that is that's looked at and that's taken into consideration. And that is what the RSAE is there to do. We are supposed to be the middleman between the community and the government, and to say, this is the voice of the community, this is what we feel is fair, this is how we need to handle these funds. So yes, the eligibility was changed, like you said, for the better, because they realized, like, is this truly giving everyone an opportunity to be able to receive recompense for the harms that they experienced.
Yeah, and I kind of glossed over that, but as far as I understand it, you can correct me if I didn't get it right, but it was basically anyone who was on the committee was excluded from being chosen to be given reparations, correct? Which would basically mean if you, okay, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just going to say I think that decision was city council. They were looking at the people sitting on city council. It would never impacted my board. We, of course, we sign what am I looking at? A conflict of interest form. I obviously am like I said, I'm a 4th generation Evanstonian. So when we're taking in applications and we're reviewing them, I would not be reviewing the Garnett family's application. So it never impacted us directly, but the city council, I think they were looking at members of government.
Yeah, which, I mean, the conflict of interest and just handling it with care, I think is key there, but they were excluded from the first round based on how it was initially written, which of course is problematic on itself. Another one of the articles that I shared, I'm looking over at it here, sorry, I'm not looking away from you, I'm looking at my other screen, was the community group seeks to delay vote on reparations they called racist. So one group that I did see, this was an article in the Daily Northwestern, this is a Facebook group called Evanston Rejects Racist Reparations. On Facebook, they're, at fake reparations, which I thought was interesting to juxtapose. We saw a little snip in that video of course, a white politician who's like, this is why reparations are no good. And I love to hear from the other side of like, this is why reparations are no good, from the people who stand to benefit from it. But from their site, they say, all Black residents of Evanston have been exposed to racism and are owed repair, but the creators of the program say the limited impact of the current proposal is because of the size of the fund. However, this only reinforces our claim that the proposed program is incomplete and deserves more community involvement. I was wondering if you could talk about interacting with that group and like how that's looked.
there's parts of that I agree with. Make no mistake, when I got involved with reparations work, it was because I found out about this. I found out that there was 16 families and that they were being chosen between this time and this time. And I said, my family's been here since 1913. We had housing discrimination. Why aren't we included? Where am I in this conversation? So I ran to, fortunately had access to one of the leaders of the that were sitting on the reparations committee, and asked about it. And once I got the information, once I truly educated on myself on what this was about, I ended up being like, how can I help? So when we're talking about the anti-reparations movement that's happening in Evanston, the program is incomplete, and it does need community involvement, and that is what the board is there to do. We are there to say, okay, they have passed this $10 million program. The first step has been authorized and pushed forward, which is that $400,000 housing program. That's only 4%, right, Kelly? That's 4% of this program. So we still have 96% to go, and we still have a lot of money to allocate. And we are going to tackle healthcare. We are going to tackle education. There's so many different elements to reparations, and I don't want people to think that just because they were not eligible for this first step, or they were not chosen for this first step, that does not mean that they are not going to receive reparations of some kind. And I think the distinction that we have to make, because I know we're running low on time, is that until something, receiving reparations in Evanston, which will happen for me and my family, does not exclude me from receiving federal reparations if and when that happens. This is not a end all, one and done. This is a first step. This is a city, and we are very fortunate to have the opportunity to find out how can we address this within our own community. And we're setting a template for the rest of the United States. But that does not mean that every other city and every other entity that tackles reparations is going to do it like we are doing it in Evanston, nor should they, because the damages are different in every city. The history is different, and you have to look at those things. So that's why I wanted to do that whole Black History Month lesson that I did, because it really does give us some idea of why housing was the first step for Evanston. Yeah. But the entities that are doing it in the state of California or New Jersey, the city of Chicago has started talking about it. So we have a lot of different places that are starting this conversation. So this is just the beginning. We're just touching the surface.
And thanks, Justin. And I think that this slide sharing is basically the equivalent of us getting a cane off the stage.
Yep,
I will say
playing. The piano
agree with everything that you just said. Also, we're going to have some actions because we also know that this does need to happen at the federal level, to go back to what you were saying about HB 40, and that I think we're going to, at the end of this call, and I see too that we've shared our contact information for the IISJA. So follow us on social to get also more action items. And now we will have a part 2 on this conversation. I see also, so I'm getting a little teleprompter, and now I'm going to turn it over to Rose Coliseum.
All right, thank you so much, Justin and Kelly. That was excellent. I really feel a lot of our challenges or problems, I could say, are caused by folks really not understanding. So thank you so much for shedding light. I am glad we recorded this. I hope we can spread it far and wide. I am going to take a little bit of a turn here because we would be remiss not to mention this topic. I want to take the opportunity to speak to you, of course, if you can't guess, the Supreme Court pledge of President Biden to select an African-American woman to the court. This is, of course, an incredible opportunity to diversify the court. And I am just giddy about it, to tell you the truth. The first Black woman to serve on America's highest court. I'm actually going to do something different. Apologize for the long Sorry about that. I got muted somehow when I launched that. So yes, what I was saying is that this is a really good ask from Demand Justice. As y'all probably know, our own Senator Dick Durbin is the lead on the Judiciary Committee. And this particular ask that I just dropped is, I know there's snow out there, everyone, but it is to actually print out a letter, might require going to FedEx or Kinko's. I don't know if everybody has a printer, and to deliver a letter once the snow clears and it's safe to our senator's office. I hope you do take the time to check that out. I just have a couple of more slides here. I want to get a little deeper. Essentially, what I'm trying to do here is provide some talking points. This should not be controversial, but it is. And so I want to share with you some talking points from the White House and also from Democrats. So here goes. I want to make sure you do know that President Biden did host Durban and Grassley. I believe that was yesterday. They want to make sure they cover all their bases, which I think is wise. And also President Biden and Vice President Harris will be meeting with Schumer and McConnell. If they haven't already, that will be coming up soon. Here's some important points. Everybody should know this inherently, but it has to be said. The president will lead a thorough and rigorous process to name a qualified nominee with strong experience, character, and integrity, who will be the first Black woman to serve on our highest court. Next slide, please. So this shows you the camaraderie, hopefully, that's going on here. And I'm sorry, if we can go back to importance of having representative and a diverse court. That would be really cool. I want to call out that there's really unfortunate consternation about President Biden's pledge to nominate a Black woman. As we see Vice President Harris, I think we had some of the same with her, and it is not acceptable. We didn't hear that when former presidents nominated white women. Let me give you a couple of examples if I could. When President Reagan honored his campaign pledge to place the first woman on the court, he said it symbolized the unique American opportunity that permits persons of any race, sex, age, from every section and every walk of life to aspire and achieve in a manner never before even dreamed about in human history. That seems like a pretty complete thought there. And then, as I call him, the former guy also promised to select a woman for the Supreme Court. Not my selection, but not only was there no such complaints from the other side about choosing a nominee from a specific demographic from the same corners, but there was widespread praise now of Justice Barrett on those same grounds. Next slide, please. All right, some of you, the folks that are tied to everything politics like me, might know who this gentleman is. When President Biden names his nominee to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court, he will lean on this guy, former Senator Doug Jones of Alabama, to help guide her through the Senate confirmation process. A source, this gentleman is familiar with the makings of the Senate. So I want to tell you a little bit about this gentleman. Jones is best known for prosecuting the perpetrators of the Birmingham church bombing that almost 40 years ago now killed 4 young girls in the civil rights era crime. He won special election in 2017 to fill former seat left by Jeff Sessions. Biden has said he plans to name his nominee by the end of the month. Next slide, please. The last slide I have here for you is just some additional strong messaging. For those of you that have joined us at other meetings this year, you will notice that we are very keen on messaging. We had one of the messaging gurus on one of our calls, Anat Shankar Osario, and I think these words are very important. They were shared with me from the National Council of Jewish Women. So let me just brief you on some of these highlights. So as we celebrate Justice Breyer's legacy on the court, we call on the president to swiftly nominate a fair, independent, and qualified judge. I think those are key terms. Also, despite many qualified Black women judges, there has never been a Black woman on the Supreme Court, and it is, well, boy howdy, it has been long past time for this institution to better reflect the diversity of the American people. So I hope you can take all that in. I hope you have the opportunity to send and demand justice. If not, if going out in the snow, I get it, is not for you, please email, call, whatever works, not only Senator Durbin, but also Senator Duckworth. I am going to turn it over to Jonathan, but I just want to let you know I will be placing some additional things into the chat. We do have a number of really great events coming up. We mentioned some of them to you already, but we have a role event we'll be talking about. That's tomorrow. We also have another Social Justice Alliance event on Saturday, aforementioned to you, Saturday at noon. And this is going to be about gun violence prevention and Ethan's Law. And then there's more, but I'll stop at this one. As many of you have heard me say, Wisconsin is an epicenter state. And we will be having a phone bank to ensure that everyone has a voice in Wisconsin to vote. And I just want to send you one more reminder to say that what happens in Wisconsin really affects all of us. So I hope you can get in on some of our Wisconsin actions. And with that, over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Rose. And yep, so yeah, going back to our reparations discussion, just want to kind of highlight some things for people to be doing beyond that. I think you've seen that we kind of covered this at a very high level. There's a lot deeper dive to do on all sorts of this, whether it's from the history of this, both here and internationally, to, you know, specifically what's happening in Evanston and how people are responding to it, to also, you know, attending our, you know, whether you're attending some, you know, stuff that's going on in Evanston about it, or whether you're attending our anti-racist work groups at 10 a.m. on Sundays, or our IISJA meetings at noon on Saturdays. This is definitely a topic that we will be revisiting and we will be going deeper into. So please do that. Please do some more, you know, looking into this stuff and trying to learn about the details online. We're also hopefully going to get you in the next day or so, get you a list of materials. As I think you could tell, Kelly has definitely done her homework and put a lot of stuff together on that. So we could send something out to everyone who came to this, who registered for this call. So beyond that, again, going to the national level of HR 40, letters to the editor, contacting your reps, you know, those are definitely, you know, key things to keep doing, to let them know that this is on your radar and it should be on theirs, and we should be trying to move this forward as well as everything else. So, all right. And with that, I believe I am handing it off to Marcy.
Okay. Hey, I just, Rose touched on this a little bit. I just want to make an announcement about the rural call that's going to be tomorrow. It's going to be about, Richard Martin is going to talk about how we need to talk to rural people, and about how rural people have totally several different types of ways. So if you could come to the meeting tomorrow night. I apologize, I wasn't quite ready for to be put into the mix right now. So I was not prepared, sorry. Anyway, but tomorrow night is going to be the rural meeting. Thank you.
Kelly? Did you call my name, Kim? Talk about REI Illinois next week. Okay, sure. Join us next week on this very same call. We're going to be talking about race, equity, and inclusion. We will have 8 calls over the course of 2022, where that will be the primary focus of our state call. We really want to bake REI into all of the work that we do in with Indivisible Illinois. And so join us next week to find out how to get started or continue that journey for yourself, and then continue joining us to really flex that muscle and work on, you know, developing those strengths in our work.
I guess I will come back, and I just want to thank Indivisible Illinois and the SJA for having me this evening, for giving me this platform to share and to share with all of you. I hope that everyone walks away feeling more educated, to be able to discuss reparations and just more knowledgeable about what's happening right here in our own backyard in Evanston. This is historic, even though, like Kelly mentioned, it's complicated, very, very complicated work. It is happening, and it is something that we need to discuss. I do believe we had one Q&A question that we will get to. And the question was, does the debt that is owed to Black folks depend on the comfort of white people? And that is that's a loaded question. I will start, and I'll let Kelly also speak on this, and then we'll wrap this up. But I do think that there of course has to be collaboration between entities, because obviously we all know that the US government is predominantly made up of white politicians. So when we're looking at what reparations looks like on any level that is government involved, of course, there is going to be the element of how those white people feel. However, like I said, the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston, that is what we are there to make sure does not go awry. We are there to be the direct line that says this is how we need to be spending this money. And the RSAE is Black-led and Black-informed, and that is the way it will stay. And I think that every city or every entity that looks at reparations needs to have at least a predominantly Black-led movement when discussing the harms done, because yes, white comfort is a big piece of this. And as we know, it is this controversial political subject that white politicians don't want to talk about.
Well, because we know that racism and white supremacy are systemic. So I think that's a good question about the comfort of white people. And the way that white supremacy is built is to make white people uncomfortable talking about these things, right? So that's a real, very good, deep question. At like the very end of this meeting, we could have a whole other meeting about it. I will say that the intent of our REI work starting next week on our call is to really explore that idea of comfort and getting out of that comfort and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I guess, and then I think that evolves into being comfortable, right? So ideally, in a perfect world. Someone also asked, not related necessarily to reparations, but how can the recording of this call be accessed? We will put it on Facebook. We will put it on the Indivisible Illinois website. We also have YouTube, so it will be out there for anyone who wants to watch this call later. And if anyone has any other questions, we do have like 2 minutes left. You can use the Q&A. You're welcome. So or we can just, you know what, take a little time back on our Wednesday night, and you know, thanks everyone so much for joining us to kick off this discussion. Cam, was there anything that you wanted to say at the very end of this call?
Please join us next week for that REI kickoff and discussion. And we will, and look for this group to come back. We are doing a part 2 to this series, and we will continue this series throughout the country. So please stay tuned for more information as it relates to reparations. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much,
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Night.